Jensen Interceptor, quite possibly the coolest name for a car ever, is to me the epitome of 1970s high-end driving. There's nothing more 70s than playing the latest tunes on your 8-track, and with Cliff Richard being a fan of the car, it's not hard to imagine him blasting down the M1, music blaring out of the windows. And don't you just lust for a tiny ashtray like this in your car? Well, at least I do anyway. It doesn't matter if you don't smoke, just put loose change in it or a chapstick. Jensen Motors was much more than the Interceptor. It's a car that foreshadowed the Audi Quattro by 15 years and set a world record that stood for over 30 years. This is the Jensen Interceptor story. The Jensen brothers, Alan and Richard, had been producing custom cars since the mid-1920s. Taking car chassis from other car makers and fashioning their own bodies was always their first love, but they came to prominence in 1934 when they were commissioned by the famous film actor Clark Gable, him of Gone with the Wind fame, to design and build a custom car based on a Ford V8 chassis. Jensen Motors made various vehicles before the war, including commercial vehicles, and these designs were converted into ambulances and fire engines for the war effort. After the war, the company turned its attention to luxury saloon cars with the Jensen PW in 1946. Before the Interceptor, we had the Interceptor. Jensen's factory was in West Bromwich, very close to Austin and Birmingham, so it's natural Jensen would look to this company to borrow parts. In fact, the 1950 Interceptor would be a bit of an Austin parts bin special. The chassis was a stretched Austin A70 and the 4-litre straight 6 engine was lifted from the Austin shear line. Jensen weren't high volume, so were always looking to reuse parts rather than reinvent them. But like Jaguar and Aston Martin, they made cars for the motorist with a chest full of guineas to throw around. The Interceptor was pricey at £2,645 in 1952, which is around £76,000 today. The Interceptor would be succeeded by the 541 in 1954. Although the show car used aluminium panels, the production car used the then uncommon material of fiberglass for the body, saving 150 kilograms over the old car. This allowed its increasingly large engines to burn up the miles on the new unrestricted motorways. The 541R arrived in 1954, offering even more power from that Austin 4-litre engine. The new car could get to 125 miles an hour, making it one of the fastest 4-seaters around. The 541S in 1960 provided more room and comfort, with an extra 10 centimetres of width and a Motorola radio. The drivetrain also got a major boost, with the car receiving an automatic gearbox courtesy of Rolls-Royce. The car offered brisk acceleration and high top speeds, but it's clear Jensen was always worried about accidents, as they installed safety belts as standard, plus a first aid kit and a fire extinguisher. Just before the 541S was launched, Jensen Motors was bought by a company called Norcross. Alan Jensen retired but remained on the board, but Richard Jensen stayed on as chairman of the company. The last Grand Tourer Jensen released before the 1966 Interceptor was the 1962 CV8. The Austin 4-litre had been swapped for powerful Chrysler engines, first the 5.9-litre Golden Commando V8, then the 6.3-litre, and by now most customers were choosing an automatic gearbox which fit this Grand Tourer well. The top speed had risen to 136 miles an hour with a 6.7 second 0 to 60 time. The new car also received a new distinctive V-pattern headlight arrangement which split opinions. But they'd also promote the car by getting it featured in TV shows such as The Baron. For the next car, the Jensen brothers and lead designer Eric Neal put their weight behind the P66, an evolution to the CV8. They produced a design for the car and got as far as promotional material, but the owners of Jensen Motors Norcross weren't happy with this direction and wanted something more exotic, something more Italian that would put Jensen on the map and dramatically increase sales. This led to an impasse and would lead to both the Jensen brothers and Eric Neal, who'd penned every car since the 1950 Interceptor, leaving the company in short order. Jensen Motors would seek design proposals for their new car from several design houses. The starting point would be the existing CV8, so any design had to fit on this chassis. The winning design was from Milan styling house Carrozzeria Touring. Their design wouldn't use light fiberglass like the CV8 had. The new car would see a return to aluminium. It would also use a stiffer chassis, which led to a car that was a little heavier than the outgoing CV8. But with newer, more powerful Chrysler V8 engines, this car was no slouch, with a 0 to 60 time approaching 7 seconds and a 135 mph top speed. This compared favourably to the Aston Martin DB6 and Jaguar E-Type, plus foreign rivals like the Pontiac GTO and Porsche 911. The car would use either a 4-speed manual or a 3-speed automatic. Only 3 gears for an automatic might seem low today, but at that time it was fairly typical. It did mean, however, that the car could get up to 80 miles an hour in second gear. Ever since the Interceptor launched, there's been speculation the car's design was influenced by the strikingly similar Brezzinca 4200 from Brazil. Launched in 1964 and designed by Rigoberto Sole Gisbert, this car appeared a year before the Interceptor. But of course the Interceptor's design had started way before the Brezzinca was shown to the public. And talking about the Interceptor's design, Carrozzeria Touring were having problems translating their designs from paper to the jigs and tools that could make real cars. Jensen cast around for some help and found it with Turin-based Vignale. Early Interceptor bodies would be made at Vignale's factory before Jensen could ramp up production at their West Bromwich base. The Interceptor was luxurious, with leather seats, electric windows and Wilton wool carpeting. Large steering wheels are usually a sign of heavy, unassisted steering, but the Interceptor did include power steering. Its party trick would be the enormous rear glass that hid a hatchback lid, quite a rarity for the time. This gave the driver access to a large cargo area, much larger than that of the competition. The only downside with this large boot was it left little room for rear passengers. This car was strictly a 2+2 with cramped legroom. The starting price for the 1966 Interceptor will be £2,394. Today that's only £45,000, but a more reasonable proposition than some of Jensen's previous cars. Jensen hoped the more reasonable price and exotic looks would get wealthy 1960 shoppers flocking to their doors. The Interceptor wasn't the only car that Jensen would launch in 1965. The similar looking Jensen FF would also appear. But looks can be deceiving. The car was 12 centimeters longer and much of the running gear was different. The changes were done all to add 4-wheel drive to the car, something really quite revolutionary. This was 5 years before the Range Rover would burst onto the scene and a colossal 15 years before the Audi Quattro would define 4-wheel drive sports cars. Jensen would collaborate with Ferguson Research to create this truly revolutionary car, named the FF for Ferguson Formula. Around 2/3 of the power would be channeled to the rear wheels, with the remaining 1/3 up front. The car would also include an early form of traction control and anti-lock braking from Dunlop, developed in the 1950s, leading one publication to call the FF the safest car in the world. But you better have deep pockets if you wanted this revolutionary car. Prices started at a steep £7,705 in 1970. That's £120,000 today, significantly higher than the regular Interceptor. That extra 12 centimeters in length wasn't given over to rear legroom either. It was just as cramped in the back as the regular Interceptor. Although air conditioning was offered as an option, the system really wasn't that powerful, and for a luxury car that costs this much, this was inexcusable. But the FF had one major flaw that hindered sales. Many of the mechanical parts for the four-wheel drive system had been located on the left side of the car, just in front of the passenger. Making a car that could be sold in areas of the world where they drove on the right was almost impossible, and this closed off lucrative markets such as North America. There was some hope that sales could be improved with an even more powerful SPFF, using a 7.2 litre engine with 3 two-barreled carburetors, but these plans came to naught. With no North American sales, the FF's prospects were always going to be limited, and production ended in 1971 after just 320 cars. Soon the Interceptor and the FF would get stiffer competition. Ford would launch the mighty GT40, Aston Martin the DBS and Jaguar the XJ6, and the Interceptor was finding it hard to compete. Soon the Interceptor would fail US safety compliance tests, leaving Jensen to use precious money to have to rework the dashboard and the steering column. Safety compliance rules hit Jensen's other cars hard. They produced the Austin Healey 3000 and the Sunbeam Tiger, and altering these cars to pass safety compliance tests was much harder. Production of both cars ended, which hit Jensen's finances hard. Owners Norcross decided to sell the company in 1968, and the company was bought by a merchant bank. The Interceptor was updated to the Interceptor 2 in 1969. Fit and finish had been improved, probably helped by moving body production to Jensen's factory. Power output had also been increased. But finances at Jensen continued to be a problem. By 1970, the company had a new majority car owner, Californian car distributor and person that had a very hard name to say, Kjell Quervale, which I'm sure I've got wrong. He then brought in Donald Healey, the man behind the Healey Motor Company and the Austin Healey, and together they worked on creating a new car that would be called the Jensen Healey that was launched in 1972. Jensen released an updated version of the Interceptor in 1971. The grille and front bumper were revised, plus new alloy wheels from engineering company GKN. Inside, the car got air conditioning as standard, plus updated seats. Also by 1971, the engine had been updated to the 7.2 litre high-deck big block V8, as Chrysler had by this time detuned the 6.3 litre engine from 270 horsepower to 250. And Jensen would offer the 3 two-barreled carburetors, or the 6-pack as they like to call it, as the Jensen SP, producing an incredible 0 to 60 time of just 5.3 seconds. Along with the 1971 Interceptor 3 update, the company tried another TV tie-in, this time being driven by Jason King of the popular TV show of the same name. It seemed to help, with higher sales than the previous 2 generations of car. Although the amazing FF ended production in 1971, its swan song was the Triple F 100 in 1972. The car would get updated styling from William Townes, who'd also go on to style the 1980 Aston Martin Bulldog. This car was financed by GKN, the company who'd supplied the Interceptor 3's alloy wheels. GKN were keen to show they were more than just a company that made nuts and bolts and could do some pretty amazing engineering. Their managing director owned an Interceptor and came up with the idea of creating a one-off special edition with GKN parts. The chassis was stiffened, brakes were ventilated, the FF's four-wheel drive, ABS and traction control was retained. Everything was done to boost the already powerful 7.2 litre V8 engine. Anything not essential was jettisoned to save weight, and that meant no more power-assisted steering. The car was painted in GKN's blue and white, with a GKN badge stuck on the back for good measure. The press was called to a test track to see this special car in action. The goal was to set a record time to get from 0 to 100 miles an hour and back down to 0. Beating the record would be tough, just 19.2 seconds, and that was set on a dry track. The chosen day was a typically British rainy day. Despite this, an attempt was made. The car was rolled out, and after a warm-up, the car leapt off the mark, reaching 100 miles an hour and slamming on the brakes. Despite such a wet day, the record was broken. And not just by a little. This car recorded a time of just 12.2 seconds, a full 7 seconds faster than the previous record. When they tried later on a dry track, the car beat that with a time of just 11.5 seconds. It would take until 2004 until the record was beaten by the much lighter Caterham R500 Evo. Strangely, no attempt was made to productise this car, or to take this or the FF Racing in any form to heighten its appeal to customers. Maybe Jensen felt the Interceptor 3 was fast enough, thank you very much. Maybe it was the latest round of financial difficulties. The Jensen Healey hadn't been the big seller Jensen had hoped, and to cap it all, 1973 was the year of the oil crisis. While customers paying Interceptor prices wouldn't be worried by quadrupling in the price of petrol, in a worldwide recession they might be concerned about buying the Interceptor in the first place. Jensen soldiered on with a convertible in 1974 and a coupe in 1975. The company even introduced a new car in 1975, the Jensen GT, a shooting brake version of the Jensen Healey. But the company was in too much trouble and the receiver was called in later that year. 1975 was a dark time for British car companies. Jensen, Aston Martin and the behemoth British Leyland all fell to the global recession that had exposed the weaknesses of each of the company's portfolio of cars. The last Interceptor 3 rolled off the production line in 1976 and the company's assets were liquidated. Two new companies rose from the ashes of Jensen. One was called Jensen Parts and Service Limited, and initially they sold parts to existing customers. But soon it expanded to sell Subarus, Maseratis and Hyundais in the UK, and eventually got rights to use the Jensen badge, renaming themselves as Jensen Motors Limited in 1984. Interceptor production restarted that same year on a very limited scale, being dubbed the Interceptor Series 4. It came with a smaller 5.9 litre engine to meet newer emissions regulations, but still produced 250 horsepower. Somewhere between 15 and 36 of them were made, with the last appearing in 1992. The company did have hopes for a Mark V Interceptor, but the company ended up in bankruptcy. The allure of the mighty Interceptor is hard to shake for kids who'd grown up idolising it. By the 2000s, those kids were adults who now had the money to satisfy their nostalgia-fueled ambitions to bring the Interceptor back. In 2011, a company called CPP announced that they were planning on making a new Jensen. The chassis and body would both be aluminium and would be built at Jaguar's old home in Browns Lane, Coventry. Despite a proposed 2014 release date, this all came to nothing. Another company also attempted to revive the Jensen name in 2015. The Jensen Group, headed by former Aston Martin boss Tim Hurley, planned to produce a new Jensen GT, followed by a new Interceptor model. Prices for the new cars would start at an eye-watering £350,000. Despite high hopes at the time, nothing more has ever been heard of this effort. It's a shame these efforts have petered out. The Interceptor is a car of missed opportunities. If only the FF had been sold in left-hand drive markets, if only the FF had been cheaper and gone motor racing, if only the company had been on a more solid financial footing throughout the 1960s and 70s. Being based on the 1950s 541, maybe the handling was too compromised compared to more modern cars like the Jaguar XJ6, a car that couldn't compete on speed but was a better all-round package. And with speed limits appearing on highways around the world, where could you use the Interceptor's speed? But the Interceptor and its sister FF was a visionary car, and the world is all the better to have experienced it. This video is brought to you by nobody. Nobody! When you're looking to be on your own, nobody can give you that solitude you're seeking. For a limited time, get 20% off the monthly price of nothing by using promo code BIGCAR. Get nobody for nothing today. A big thank you to all my patrons for supporting me and putting up with my attempts at humour. To get early advert-free access to new videos or to appear in the credits, please consider supporting me using the Patreon link below from just $1 or 80p a month, and hit that subscribe button to get notified of new videos. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.